25 years after the great collapse that turned America into a wasteland of the undead, 17-year-old Marcus Chen pressed his face against the reinforced glass of Haven City's observation deck. The sprawling settlement of steel and concrete stretched behind him, home to the last 50,000 survivors on the continent. Beyond the massive walls lay the ruins of what was once Detroit, now a graveyard of twisted metal and shambling corpses. Still dreaming about the outside? Sarah Martinez joined him at the window, her training uniform bearing the fresh insignia of the Reclamation Corps. At 19 she was already being fast-tracked through the program that would supposedly prepare them to venture beyond the walls. My grandmother says the old world was beautiful once. Green fields, clear skies, cities full of life. Marcus nodded, his dark eyes tracking movement in the distant ruins. My father was part of the first generation born after the outbreak. He used to tell me stories about the missions they'd send out to gather supplies. Back then they thought they could clear sections of the city, maybe even expand Haven's borders. He paused, watching a pack of infected stumble through the skeletal remains of a shopping mall. That was before they learned about the variants. The variants were the reason no one had successfully reclaimed territory in over a decade. Unlike the shambling masses that had initially overrun civilization, these creatures had evolved, adapted, become something far more dangerous. Some retained fragments of human intelligence, others had developed enhanced physical capabilities, and the worst ones could coordinate attacks with terrifying precision. Training starts tomorrow, Sarah said, trying to inject optimism into her voice. Commander Reynolds says this new program is different. They've been studying the variants for years, developing new tactics and weapons. Maybe we'll actually have a chance. Marcus turned from the window, his expression skeptical. The last 3 training groups never made it past the outer perimeter. The one before that. He didn't need to finish. Everyone in Haven knew about the massacre at Checkpoint Delta. 32 recruits, the best and brightest of their generation, reduced to scattered remains and haunting screams that echoed across the radio before the transmission cut to static. This is different, Sarah insisted, though her voice carried less conviction than her words. They've upgraded the weapons, improved the armor. And we have the new detection equipment that can identify variants before they get close. Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp blast of the evening alarm. Throughout Haven City, lights began to flicker on as the settlement prepared for another night of vigilance. The infected were more active after dark, drawn by the heat signatures and electrical activity of the massive complex. While the walls had never been breached, the constant scratching and moaning from outside served as a nightly reminder of what lay beyond their sanctuary. My little brother keeps asking when I'll come back, Sarah said quietly, watching maintenance crews begin their evening patrol of the wall's perimeter. I told him 2 years like the program promises. But sometimes I wonder if any of us will make it back at all. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching night. The Reclamation Corps had been Haven's most ambitious project, designed to train specialized teams capable of venturing into the wasteland and establishing forward operating bases. The ultimate goal was to slowly push back the infected hordes and reclaim the American heartland, one city at a time. But after 5 years of training cycles, not a single team had successfully completed their mission. There's something they're not telling us, Marcus said, lowering his voice as a group of older residents passed by. The council meetings have been closed for months. My mother works in communications and she says they've been receiving signals from other settlements. Places that supposedly fell years ago. Sarah's eyes widened. You think there are other survivors? Other cities like Haven? I think there's a lot we don't know about what's really happening out there, Marcus replied. And I think tomorrow when we start training we're going to find out why every team before us has failed. As darkness settled over Haven City, the 2 teenagers stood in silence, watching the endless sea of infected that surrounded their home. Somewhere in that wasteland lay the bones of a civilization, waiting to be reclaimed. But first they would have to survive whatever had killed everyone who had tried before them. The training would begin at dawn, and with it, their journey into the truth about what America had become. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy as 47 recruits assembled for their first day of Reclamation Corps preparation. Marcus and Sarah found themselves among a diverse group of teenagers and young adults, all born and raised within Haven's protective walls. Commander Reynolds, a grizzled veteran with scars covering the left side of his face, surveyed the recruits with cold efficiency. Look around you, Reynolds barked, his voice echoing through the metal training hall. In 6 months half of you will be dead. In a year only 10% will remain. This isn't your typical combat training. We're preparing you to face an enemy that doesn't sleep, doesn't fear and doesn't stop. The first exercise seemed simple enough. Navigate through a darkened obstacle course while wearing full tactical gear. But as the recruits soon discovered, the course was populated with realistic infected mannequins that would spring to life at unexpected moments. The goal wasn't just to reach the end, but to do so while maintaining communication with your team and preserving ammunition. Marcus found himself paired with Sarah and two other recruits. David Kim, a tech specialist whose father had helped design Haven's defense systems, and Elena Rodriguez, whose aggressive fighting style had earned her a reputation in the settlement's underground fighting rings. Their first run through the course was a disaster. David froze when a mannequin burst from a hidden compartment, Elena wasted ammunition on targets that were already neutralized, and Sarah's radio communications became garbled under stress. Pathetic, Reynolds commented as the team emerged from the course, breathing heavily. In the real world, you'd all be infected by now. The variants would have tracked your panicked movements and surrounded you before you made it halfway through. But it was during the second week of training that the recruits encountered their first real shock. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, Haven's lead researcher on infected behavior, arrived at the training facility with a special presentation. What she revealed would change everything the recruits thought they knew about their enemy. The infected aren't just mindless creatures, Dr. Hayes explained, projecting holographic displays of various variant types. Our latest research indicates they're evolving at an accelerated rate. What we're seeing now are distinct subspecies, each with unique capabilities and behavioral patterns. The images were horrifying. Stalkers that could climb walls and remain motionless for hours before striking. Screamers whose vocalizations could disorient humans and coordinate infected attacks. And most terrifying of all, the mimics, variants that retained enough human intelligence to use tools, set traps, and even impersonate human voices. Last month, we lost contact with Outpost 7, Dr. Hayes continued. When we sent a drone to investigate, we found the facility intact but empty. The security footage showed the personnel opening the doors willingly, apparently responding to distress calls from other team members. Only the team members making those calls had been dead for 3 days. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The implications were staggering. If the variants could think, plan, and deceive, then everything they'd been taught about combat tactics would need to be reconsidered. Sarah grabbed his arm, her knuckles white with tension. The real test came during their third week, when Reynolds announced they would be conducting a live-fire exercise in the buffer zone, a carefully cleared area between Haven's walls and the true wasteland beyond. It would be the first time any of the recruits had faced actual infected. The exercise began at dawn. 4 teams of 6 recruits each would enter the buffer zone through different access points, eliminate any infected they encountered, and converge on a central checkpoint to retrieve vital supplies. Marcus's team included Sarah, David, Elena, and 2 others. Jake Thompson, a former mechanic's son with steady hands, and Lisa Park, whose medical training made her invaluable for field operations. The first infected they encountered was a standard shambler, a former office worker still dressed in the rotting remains of a business suit. Elena took it down with a clean headshot, her military training evident in her precise movements. But as they pressed deeper into the buffer zone, the infected became more numerous and aggressive. It was David who first spotted the anomaly. "That one's moving differently," he whispered, pointing to a figure lurking behind an overturned car. Unlike the other infected, this one wasn't stumbling aimlessly. It was crouched, watching, waiting. "Variant," Marcus breathed, remembering Dr. Hayes' briefings. "It's hunting us." The creature, once human, now something else entirely, studied the team with predatory intelligence. Its skin had taken on a grayish hue, and its fingernails had elongated into claw-like extensions. But it was the eyes that truly disturbed them. They held a spark of cunning that no shambler possessed. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Then the variant let out a low, guttural call that echoed through the ruins. In response, other infected began emerging from hiding places throughout the buffer zone, more coordinated in their movements than anything the recruits had been prepared for. "We're surrounded," Sarah whispered into her radio. "This isn't random. They're hunting as a pack." The coordinated attack unfolded with terrifying precision. As the variant's call echoed through the buffer zone, infected emerged from buildings, vehicles, and debris piles in a carefully orchestrated ambush. Marcus realized with growing horror that they had been herded into this position, guided by an intelligence that shouldn't exist in creatures that were supposed to be mindless. "Command, this is Alpha Team," Sarah spoke urgently into her radio. "We have a code red situation. The infected are displaying coordinated behavior. Request immediate extraction." Static answered her. Then Commander Reynolds' voice crackled through, distorted and broken. Alpha Team, experiencing interference, cannot, extraction. The radio's being jammed, David said, his voice tight with panic as he frantically adjusted the communication equipment. But that's impossible. The infected don't have technology. Elena had taken position behind a rusted car, her rifle trained on the approaching horde. Technology or not, we need to move. Now. She fired 3 quick shots, dropping infected that were getting too close, but for every one that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. The variant that had first spotted them remained crouched behind the overturned car, its intelligent eyes tracking their every movement. It wasn't participating in the direct attack, it was observing, learning, commanding. Marcus felt a chill as he realized they were being studied like lab rats in a maze. There, Jake pointed to a partially collapsed building about 50 yards away. If we can reach that structure, we might be able to find a way back to the wall. The team began moving in formation, but the infected seemed to anticipate their every step. When they tried to go left, infected blocked their path. When they turned right, more creatures emerged from hiding. It was as if they were being guided through a predetermined route. They're not trying to kill us, Marcus realized aloud. They're driving us somewhere specific. Lisa, who had been monitoring their path on a handheld GPS device, looked up with alarm. We're being pushed toward the old subway entrance. The one that was sealed off during the first year after the outbreak. The subway system had been one of the first casualties of the infected apocalypse. The tunnels had become breeding grounds for the creatures, and after several disastrous attempts to clear them, the entrances had been welded shut and abandoned. No one had ventured into the underground networks for over 20 years. Command, do you copy? Sarah tried the radio again. This time, a different voice responded, one that chilled them to the bone. Sarah, this is Marcus. We're trapped in the subway. Please help us. The voice was perfect, an exact imitation of Marcus's speech patterns and intonation. But Marcus was standing right next to her, his face pale with shock. Somewhere in the ruins, something was using his voice to lure other teams into danger. Mimic, Elena whispered, her rifle now trained on the shadows around them. Dr. Hayes warned us about this. They can reproduce human voices, but they need to hear them first. That means there's one close enough to have been listening to us. The infected continued to press closer, their movements becoming more aggressive as the team was forced toward the subway entrance. The sealed doorway loomed ahead, but as they approached, David made a disturbing discovery. The welding's been broken, he said, examining the twisted metal that had once secured the entrance. From the inside. Something down there has been trying to get out. The sounds from below were unmistakable now, shuffling footsteps, scraping claws, and something else that made their blood run cold. Voices. Human voices calling for help, pleading for rescue, screaming in agony. But they all knew that no living person had been in those tunnels for decades. We're not going down there, Elena said firmly, raising her weapon toward the approaching infected. I'd rather die fighting up here than face whatever's been living in those tunnels. But the choice was being taken from them. The infected had formed a complete circle around their position, with the subway entrance as the only apparent escape route. The variant that had been observing them finally stood, its movements fluid and purposeful. When it spoke, its voice was a perfect imitation of Commander Reynolds. Proceed to extraction point Alpha. This is a direct order. It's been listening to our communications, Sarah realized. It knows our protocols, our command structure. It's been learning from us. Jake had been studying the subway entrance more closely, and his discovery made the situation even more desperate. There are fresh scratches around the doorway. Something's been coming up from the tunnels regularly. And look at this. He pointed to marks in the concrete that looked disturbingly like tallies, as if something had been keeping count. The infected began to close in, their movements synchronized in a way that defied everything the recruits had been taught. But as they prepared for what seemed like a hopeless last stand, Marcus noticed something that gave him a desperate idea. The storm drain, he said, pointing to a partially hidden grate about 30 feet away. It's not part of the subway system. It might lead back toward the city. The infected sensed their change in focus and began moving faster, but Elena provided covering fire while the team made their desperate sprint toward the drain. As they reached it, Jake used his tools to pry open the grate, revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. One by one, Marcus ordered. Sarah first, then David, then Lisa. But as Sarah lowered herself into the drain, her scream echoed back up from the darkness below. Something was waiting for them down there too. Sarah's scream cut through the air like a blade, followed by the sound of her body hitting water with a splash that echoed through the storm drain. Marcus didn't hesitate. He dropped through the grate after her, landing hard in knee-deep, freezing water that reeked of decay and something far worse. The darkness was absolute. Marcus fumbled for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the murk to reveal Sarah struggling against something in the water. Not infected, but something else. A tangle of cables and metal debris that had snagged her equipment vest. Her face was pale with shock and pain, but she was alive. "My ankle," she gasped as Marcus helped free her from the debris. "I think it's broken." Above them, the sounds of the others dropping into the drain mixed with the increasingly frantic noises of the infected trying to follow. Elena's voice called down, "Marcus, report. Are you both alive?" "Sarah's injured but mobile," Marcus called back. "The water's about 3 feet deep. Watch out for debris." One by one the rest of the team descended into the storm drain. David's technical equipment sparked and hissed as it hit the water, and Lisa immediately began examining Sarah's ankle by flashlight. The narrow concrete tunnel stretched in both directions, disappearing into darkness that seemed to swallow their light beams. "Which way?" Jake asked, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Elena consulted her compass, though the readings seemed erratic underground. "East should take us back toward Haven. But we need to move fast. Those infected up there will find another way down eventually." They began wading through the murky water, Sarah leaning heavily on Marcus for support. The tunnel was older than Haven City itself, a relic from the world before the outbreak. Graffiti covered the walls in places, some of it dating back decades, but other markings looked disturbingly fresh. "Someone's been down here recently," David observed, pointing to scratches in the concrete that looked like claw marks. "And not just passing through. These marks suggest something has been living here." The tunnel began to branch into multiple passages, creating a maze-like network that disoriented the team. Lisa's GPS device had lost signal entirely, and their radios picked up only static mixed with occasional bursts of what sounded like human voices, but voices that spoke in languages none of them recognized. "Wait," Elena held up her hand, motioning for silence. "Do you hear that?" They all stopped, listening intently. From somewhere ahead came a sound that made their blood freeze, children's laughter, echoing through the tunnels with an otherworldly quality that suggested it wasn't coming from any living child. "Mimics," Sarah whispered, her injured ankle forgotten in the face of this new threat. "They're not just imitating voices now. They're creating entire audio scenarios." The laughter grew closer, accompanied by the sound of running footsteps that splashed through the water. But when Elena raised her weapon and aimed her flashlight toward the sound, the tunnel ahead was empty. The laughter continued, now seeming to come from behind them. "They're playing with us," Marcus realized. "Testing our reactions, learning our fear responses." David had been examining the tunnel walls more closely, and his discovery added to their growing dread. "These aren't just storm drains. Look at the construction. Some of these passages were built after the outbreak. Someone or something has been expanding the tunnel system." The implications hit them all at once. The underground network wasn't just a hiding place, it was a habitat that had been deliberately modified and expanded. Something had been living down here for years, possibly decades, developing and evolving in the dark spaces beneath Haven City. They pressed forward, but the tunnel seemed to be changing around them. Passages that had been clear minutes before now led to dead ends. Routes that should have taken them back toward the city instead curved deeper underground. It was as if the maze itself was alive, shifting to trap them in its depths. "We're being herded again," Elena said grimly. "Just like up on the surface. Something is controlling our path." The children's laughter had stopped, replaced by something far more unsettling, adult voices engaged in casual conversation, discussing mundane topics like weather and work schedules. The voices were clear enough to understand, but they echoed from all directions, making it impossible to determine their source. "That's Dr. Hayes," Lisa said suddenly, recognizing one of the voices. "She's talking about the infected research. But how can she be down here?" Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold water. "She's not. That's something else using her voice. But if it can imitate her so perfectly, it means it's been listening to her for a long time." The conversation continued, revealing details about Haven's defenses, research projects, and strategic plans that should have been classified. Whatever was creating these voices had access to highly sensitive information, suggesting that the city's security had been compromised far more extensively than anyone realized. They reached another branch in the tunnel system, this one leading to a chamber that was noticeably different from the storm drains. The walls were smoother, the construction more recent, and the air carried a strange, sweet odor that reminded Marcus of flowers mixed with decay. "This isn't city infrastructure," David said, running his hands along the walls. "This was built by hand, carved out of the rock. And recently..." Elena's flashlight revealed something that made them all step back in horror. The chamber walls were covered in symbols, not random scratches, but deliberate patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. And scattered throughout the chamber were personal items: watches, jewelry, photographs, and clothing that clearly belonged to people from Haven City. "These are from the missing survey teams," Sarah breathed. "The ones that disappeared during the early expansion attempts." But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. As they moved deeper into the chamber, they found evidence of habitation. Sleeping areas, food storage, and what appeared to be a workshop where tools and weapons had been modified in ways that suggested both human ingenuity and something far more alien. The voices in the tunnels had gone silent, but the silence was somehow more terrifying than the sounds had been. Something was watching them from the darkness, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The chamber opened into something that defied all expectations, a vast underground complex that stretched beyond the reach of their flashlights. What they had taken for a simple storm drain system was revealed to be merely the entrance to something far more elaborate and terrifying. "This is impossible," David whispered, his voice barely audible in the cathedral-like space. The geological surveys of Haven City showed solid bedrock below the storm drains. "This cavern shouldn't exist." Elena swept her tactical light across the cavern floor, revealing a sight that made them all freeze. The space was inhabited, not by the shambling infected they knew, but by something that represented an evolution beyond their worst nightmares. Figures moved through the darkness with purpose and intelligence, constructing what appeared to be a primitive but functional settlement. "They're building," Lisa observed, her medical training helping her remain analytical despite the horror. "Look at the structures. They're not random. There's planning, architecture, social organization." The creatures were clearly descended from the infected, but they had retained enough human intelligence to create tools, organize their society, and adapt to their environment. They wore clothing fashioned from scavenged materials, used weapons that appeared to be modified from salvaged equipment, and moved with the coordinated efficiency of a functioning community. "How long have they been down here?" Sarah asked, her injured ankle forgotten as she watched the underground civilization through the scope of her rifle. "How many generations?" Marcus was studying the layout of the settlement, trying to understand what they were witnessing. "Remember what Dr. Hayes said about accelerated evolution? What if some of the infected didn't just develop enhanced physical abilities? What if they retained enough cognitive function to survive and reproduce?" The implications were staggering. If the infected could evolve, learn, and build civilizations, then everything Haven City believed about the outside world was fundamentally wrong. The wasteland wasn't just populated by mindless creatures, it was home to an entirely new form of intelligent life. One of the creatures had noticed them. Unlike the infected they had encountered above ground, this one didn't immediately attack. Instead, it tilted its head with bird-like curiosity, studying them with eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. When it spoke, its voice was a horrible mixture of human speech and something else entirely. "Surface dwellers," it said, the words distorted but understandable. "You have come to the deep places. Why do you trespass in our domain?" Elena kept her weapon trained on the creature, but she didn't fire. The thing was clearly intelligent, and shooting it might provoke an attack from the entire underground community. "We were fleeing the infected above. We mean no harm to your people." The creature laughed, a sound like broken glass mixed with human mirth. "Harm? You speak of harm while you live in your walls, sending your young to die in the wasteland above. We know of your training programs, your reclamation projects. We hear your radio transmissions, intercept your communications. You are the invaders here." David was recording everything on his equipment, hoping some of it would survive to be analyzed later. "You can understand our technology?" "We were human once," the creature replied. "Some of us remember. Some of us learned. We adapted while you cowered behind your barriers. We thrived while you merely survived." More creatures were gathering now, drawn by the conversation. They were diverse in appearance, some barely distinguishable from humans except for their pale skin and enlarged eyes, others more dramatically changed with elongated limbs and modified facial features. But all of them showed signs of intelligence and purpose. "The teams that disappeared," Marcus said slowly, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "The missing survey groups. What happened to them?" The creature's expression, if it could be called that, shifted to something that might have been sadness. Some joined us willingly when they understood the truth. Others fought and died. A few were taken back to the surface, but they carried our message in their blood. They became our eyes and ears in your city. The horrifying realization hit them all at once. Haven City had been infiltrated, not by mindless infected, but by intelligent agents working for this underground civilization. The security breaches, the failed missions, the compromised communications. All of it had been orchestrated by creatures who understood human nature better than humans understood them. "You're planning something," Elena said, her finger hovering over her weapon's trigger. "All of this, the organized attacks, the infiltration, it's preparation for something bigger." The creature nodded slowly. "The surface world belongs to the past. We are the future. Your city will fall, but not to mindless infected. It will fall to us, and those who survive will be given a choice: evolve or perish." Jake had been studying the underground settlement more closely, and his discovery added urgency to their situation. There are hundreds of them down here. Maybe thousands. And they have equipment, weapons, communication devices, technology that looks like it came from Haven City. The conversation was interrupted by a new sound, footsteps echoing through the tunnels they had just exited. The infected from the surface had found another way down, and they were closing in on the team's position. "Your surface dwellers approach," the creature observed with what might have been amusement. "They will not distinguish between you and us. In their eyes, we are all enemies to be destroyed." Marcus realized they were trapped between two forces: the mindless infected pursuing them from above, and the intelligent creatures surrounding them in the cavern. But as the sounds of approaching infected grew louder, he noticed something unexpected. The underground dwellers were also preparing for battle, taking positions to defend their settlement. "You're going to fight them," Sarah observed. "The infected. You're going to fight your own kind." The creature's laugh was bitter. "They are not our kind. They are the failures, the ones who could not adapt. We are what humanity was meant to become. They are what humanity fears to become." The first infected burst into the cavern, and the underground war began. The cavern erupted into chaos as the infected poured through the tunnel entrance like a black tide. The underground dwellers moved with startling coordination, their weapons crackling with electrical energy that Marcus realized had been jury-rigged from Haven City's own technology. But what shocked him most was how efficiently they fought, not with the desperate savagery of cornered animals, but with the calculated precision of experienced soldiers. "They're protecting us," Sarah breathed, watching as the creatures formed a defensive line between the team and the incoming infected. "Why are they protecting us?" The creature that had spoken to them earlier appeared at Marcus's side, moving within human speed. "Because you have seen the truth. You understand now that the world is not as simple as your leaders told you. You are witnesses, and witnesses are valuable." Elena kept her weapon ready but found herself fighting alongside beings she had been trained to consider enemies. The infected flooding the cavern were the traditional kind: mindless, savage, driven only by hunger. They showed no recognition of the underground dwellers' intelligence, attacking them with the same ferocity they would show any human. "David, get that equipment working," Marcus shouted over the sounds of battle. "We need to record this. Haven City needs to know what's really happening out here." David's hands flew over his damaged communication gear, trying to establish contact with the surface. "I'm getting something," he called back. "But it's not Haven City. There are signals coming from multiple sources. Other settlements, maybe even other cities that we thought were lost." The battle raged around them, but Marcus found himself studying the underground dwellers' tactics. They fought with weapons that seemed to disrupt the infected's nervous systems, causing them to collapse without visible wounds. More importantly, they fought as a unified force, with leaders issuing commands and soldiers responding with military precision. "This isn't evolution," he realized aloud. "This is civilization. They've built a society down here, complete with hierarchy, technology, and military organization." Lisa was treating Sarah's injured ankle while providing medical aid to wounded underground dwellers, a surreal situation that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. "Their physiology is fascinating," she murmured, examining a wounded creature's injuries. "They've retained human intelligence while developing enhanced physical capabilities. Faster healing, improved sensory perception, adapted vision for underground life." The creature that had been speaking with them returned, its weapon smoking from recent use. "The immediate threat is contained, but more will come. Your surface dwellers have stirred up the entire region with their training exercises. The mindless ones are drawn to the activity." Elena lowered her weapon, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the surrounding creatures. You said others from Haven City joined you willingly. What did you mean? The creature gestured toward a section of the settlement where Marcus could see figures that looked more recognizably human. Your missing survey teams. When they learned the truth about the surface world, some chose to stay. They help us understand your technology, your strategies, your weaknesses. And the others? Sarah asked, though she seemed to already know the answer. They returned to Haven City as our agents. They walk among you, report to us, prepare for the day when the barriers between our worlds finally fall. David's equipment suddenly crackled to life, and Commander Reynolds' voice echoed through the cavern. All teams report immediately. We have a code black situation. The city is under attack. The transmission was filled with static and panic. In the background, they could hear explosions, screaming, and the distinctive sound of Haven City's automated defense systems activating. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized what was happening. Your people are attacking the city, he said to the creature. This was all a distraction, getting the training teams out here while you assault Haven City. The creature's expression was unreadable. Not an attack. A negotiation. Your leaders have refused to acknowledge our existence, refused to consider coexistence. Sometimes dramatic gestures are necessary to open dialogue. Elena was already moving toward the tunnel entrance. We have to get back. Our families, our friends, they're up there. But the creature blocked her path. The surface is chaos now. Your automated defenses cannot distinguish between the mindless infected and our people. Going back would mean certain death. Then help us, Marcus said suddenly. You have technology, organization, knowledge of the tunnel systems. Help us reach the city safely, and we'll help you establish real communication with our leaders. The creature studied him for a long moment. And why would you do this? Why would you trust us after learning what you have learned? Marcus looked around the cavern at the underground civilization, at the wounded creatures Lisa was treating, at the defensive positions that had protected them from the infected assault. Because you're not monsters. You're people. Different from us, evolved from us, but still people. And people can talk to each other. The creature consulted with others of its kind in a language that sounded like a mixture of human speech and something else. Clicks, whistles, and tonal variations that suggested a communication system adapted for underground acoustics. Finally, it turned back to the team. We will help you reach the surface. But understand, what you find there will not be the Haven City you left. Change is coming whether your people accept it or not. The question is whether it will be peaceful change or violent change. Jake had been monitoring the radio transmissions and his face was grim. The attack isn't just on Haven City. I'm picking up similar reports from other settlements across the continent. This is coordinated, massive. They're not just revealing themselves to us, they're revealing themselves to everyone. The creature nodded. The time for hiding is over. For too long, your people have ignored the reality of what the world has become. They have treated us as animals to be exterminated rather than as the next stage of human evolution. Tonight that changes. Sarah struggled to her feet, her ankle still painful but manageable. Then we need to get back before it's too late. Before fear and panic turn this into a war that nobody can win. The creature signaled to its people, and they began preparing for a journey to the surface. War may be inevitable, it said quietly. But perhaps, with witnesses like you, it does not have to be total. The journey back to the surface took them through a network of tunnels that revealed the true scope of the underground civilization. Miles of interconnected passages, chambers filled with hydroponic gardens, workshops where human technology was being modified and improved, and living areas that housed what Marcus estimated to be tens of thousands of evolved humans. This has been going on for decades, David observed, his equipment now functioning properly thanks to modifications made by the underground dwellers. They've been building an entire society right beneath our feet. Their guide, who had introduced himself as Cain, a name that suggested retained human identity, led them through the tunnels with the confidence of someone who had spent years mapping every passage. We have been patient, he explained. We hoped your people would eventually acknowledge our existence, perhaps even seek cooperation. But your leaders have been resistant to change. The first sign of the surface conflict came as a low rumble that shook dust from the tunnel ceiling. Explosions echoed through the passages, and the air carried the acrid smell of smoke and electrical fires. As they climbed toward ground level, the sounds of battle grew louder, not the chaotic noise of infected attacking, but the organized warfare of two intelligent forces in conflict. Your city's defenses are impressive, Cain admitted as they paused at a junction where multiple tunnels converged. But they were designed to keep out mindless infected, not coordinated assault teams with inside knowledge of the system. Elena checked her weapon, though she knew it would be of limited use in the battle above. How many of our people are working with you? Enough, Kane replied cryptically. Your Dr. Hayes has been quite helpful, though she doesn't realize the full extent of her contributions. The research data she's been collecting has allowed us to better understand both the mindless infected and your city's vulnerabilities. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Dr. Hayes isn't a traitor. She's been manipulated. Not manipulated, Kane corrected. Observed. We have been listening to Haven City's communications for years. Every radio transmission, every data burst, every strategic discussion. Your leader's refusal to acknowledge our existence has forced us to gather intelligence through other means. They reached a maintenance shaft that led directly to the city's outer perimeter. Through the opening, they could see the glow of fires and the strobing lights of emergency vehicles. The sounds of battle were deafening now, gunfire, explosions, and something else that chilled them to the bone. Coordinated chanting in the strange language the underground dwellers used. They're not trying to destroy the city, Sarah realized, listening to the rhythm of the assault. They're trying to capture it intact. Kane nodded approvingly. Your people learn quickly. Yes, we have no interest in ruling over ruins. We want to integrate, to combine our societies. But integration requires that both sides acknowledge each other's existence. Jake was monitoring radio communications, his face growing paler with each transmission. The city's defense grid is being systematically disabled. Someone with detailed knowledge of the system is guiding the attackers to critical weak points. Multiple someones, David added grimly. This level of coordination suggests they have assets throughout the city's infrastructure. Communications, power grid, water systems. They've been preparing for this for years. As they climbed toward the surface, Kane shared more details about the underground civilization's capabilities. They had developed biotechnology that allowed them to interface directly with electronic systems, giving them unprecedented access to Haven City's networks. They had breeding programs that had produced specialized variants, some designed for combat, others for infiltration, still others for technical support. We are not the random mutations your scientists believe us to be, Kane explained. We are the result of directed evolution, guided by intelligence and purpose. While your people focused on building walls, we focused on building ourselves. The shaft opened into a storage building on Haven City's outskirts. Through the windows they could see the full scope of the conflict. The city's massive defensive walls were intact, but battles were raging in the streets as underground dwellers emerged from hidden entrances throughout the urban area. The city's military was fighting bravely, but they were facing an enemy that knew their tactics, their weapons, and their weaknesses. We need to reach the command center, Marcus said, studying the battlefield. If we can get your message to the council, maybe we can stop this before it becomes a massacre. Kane studied the human faces around him. And what would that message be? That we exist? That we are not monsters? That we wish to share this world rather than inherit it by force? All of that, Elena replied. But also that we're willing to listen. Not all of us are like the leaders who've been ignoring you. Some of us understand that the world has changed and we need to change with it. The journey through the city was surreal. They moved through neighborhoods that looked normal from a distance but revealed signs of the underground dwellers' long-term infiltration up close. Modified infrastructure, hidden access points, and evidence of covert observation posts suggested that Haven City had been under surveillance for years. The irony, Kane observed as they passed a playground where children had played just hours before, is that your people have been living alongside us for years without knowing it. Our scouts, our agents, our researchers, they move through your city regularly. We know your routines, your relationships, your fears and hopes. We are not invaders. We are neighbors who have been ignored. They reached the command center as the battle reached its crescendo. The building was surrounded by both city defenders and underground dwellers, but the fighting had stopped. Instead, both sides were listening to a voice that echoed from speakers throughout the city, Dr. Hayes, speaking in measured tones about the need for dialogue and understanding. She's alive, Lisa breathed with relief. And she's trying to negotiate. But as they approached the building, they saw that the situation was more complex than it appeared. Dr. Hayes was indeed alive and speaking, but she was flanked by underground dwellers who had clearly been in communication with her for some time. The negotiation had been planned, coordinated, and orchestrated by both sides. Welcome to the new world, Kane said as they reached the command center's entrance. The question now is whether your people are ready to accept it. The command center's main conference room had been transformed into something unprecedented in human history, A meeting place where two branches of humanity sat across from each other, negotiating the future of civilization itself. Commander Reynolds sat rigid with tension, his scarred face revealing the difficulty of accepting everything he had just learned. Across from him, Dr. Hayes worked alongside three underground dwellers whose presence would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Marcus and his team entered the room as witnesses to the impossible. The battle outside had stopped, but the tension in the air was electric. City council members, military leaders, and scientists sat in stunned silence as the full scope of the underground civilization's capabilities was revealed through holographic displays and live video feeds from the tunnel networks. The question before us, Dr. Hayes was saying, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, is whether we can move forward as two separate species sharing one world, or whether we must continue the cycle of conflict that has defined the past 25 years. Kane stood at the center of the room, his presence commanding attention from both sides. We have demonstrated that we can take your city by force. Your defenses, impressive as they are, were designed to repel mindless infected, not organized opponents with inside knowledge of your systems. But conquest was never our goal. Council leader Patricia Vance, Haven City's elected representative, struggled to maintain her composure. You're asking us to accept that everything we've believed about the infected, about the outside world, has been wrong. That we've been living in ignorance while an entire civilization developed around us. Not ignorance, Kane corrected gently. Denial. Your scouting reports, your surveillance missions, your communication intercepts, they all contained evidence of our existence. But your leaders chose to interpret that evidence in ways that supported their existing beliefs rather than challenging them. Sarah limped forward, her injured ankle a reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment. I've seen their city. Their technology, their organization, their society. They're not the monsters we were taught to fear. They're people who adapted to survive in a world that rejected them. Commander Reynolds finally spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of years of failed missions. The training programs. The teams that never returned. You were testing us, weren't you? Seeing how we would react to contact with your people. We were hoping, Kane replied. Hoping that eventually, one of your teams would be able to see past their conditioning and recognize us for what we are. Marcus and his team were the first to achieve that breakthrough. Elena stepped forward, her military bearing intact despite everything she had witnessed. But why now? Why reveal yourselves at this moment? Dr. Hayes activated a display showing satellite imagery of the North American continent. Red dots indicated infected concentrations, blue dots showed human settlements, and green dots marked underground dweller communities. The pattern was shocking. The green dots vastly outnumbered the blue ones and they were growing rapidly. Because we are no longer the minority, Kane explained. Our population has reached a critical mass. We can no longer remain hidden without compromising our growth and development. The choice is integration or eventual conflict on a scale that would destroy both our peoples. David had been studying the technical displays, his engineer's mind racing through the implications. Your biotechnology, your ability to interface with electronic systems. You could revolutionize human civilization. Medicine, communication, environmental restoration, the possibilities are incredible. Just as your industrial knowledge, your historical records, and your cultural achievements could enrich our society, Kane agreed. We are not seeking to replace humanity. We are seeking to rejoin it. Lisa spoke up from her position near the medical displays. The infected, the mindless ones, they're still out there. They're still a threat to both our peoples. Separately, we've been barely surviving. Together, we might actually be able to reclaim the world. Council Leader Vance stood, her decision written clearly on her face. This is beyond my authority to decide. The people of Haven City, the other settlements, the surviving communities, they all deserve a voice in this decision. Which is why we have established contact with every surviving human settlement on the continent, Kane revealed. The conversation happening in this room is being replicated in dozens of cities and towns. The choice is not yours alone to make. Marcus looked around the room at faces that represented two different paths of human evolution. What happens to people like us? The ones who are still fully human but understand the need for change. You become bridges, Dr. Hayes answered. Ambassadors between two worlds that are learning to become one. Your generation will be the first to grow up in a world where cooperation between our peoples is possible. Jake raised his hand tentatively. What about the infected? The ones who can't think or reason. They're still dangerous to both our peoples. Kane's expression grew solemn. They are the failures of evolution, the ones who could not adapt to the change. Dealing with them will require the combined efforts of both our peoples. Your weapons and our biotechnology working together might finally be able to clear the dead zones and reclaim the world. Commander Reynolds stood slowly, his military bearing unchanged despite the paradigm shift occurring around him. I've spent my entire career preparing for war against an enemy I now realize I never understood. If we're going to do this, if we're going to try integration, we'll need new protocols, new training programs, new ways of thinking about security and defense. And we will need to earn the trust we are asking for, Kane acknowledged. Our people will need to demonstrate that cooperation is possible, that we can live alongside humans without dominating or replacing them. As the meeting continued into the night, the team that had started the day as trainees in a reclamation program found themselves witnesses to the birth of a new world. Outside, the sounds of battle had given way to the sounds of tentative cooperation. Underground dwellers and city residents working together to repair damage from the conflict and establish communication protocols. Sarah looked out the window at the dawn breaking over Haven City, where figures both human and evolved were working side by side. Do you think it will work? Can two different branches of humanity really coexist? Marcus joined her at the window, watching children from both communities playing together in the plaza below. I think we don't have a choice. The world has changed and we need to change with it. The question isn't whether we can coexist, it's whether we can thrive together. The sun rose over a world that would never be the same, but for the first time in 25 years, it rose over a world where hope was possible. The dead America was rising indeed, but not as they had expected. It was rising as something new, something unprecedented, something that might finally be strong enough to reclaim what was lost and build something better in its place. The training was over. The real work was just beginning.